Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams, spill the tea. And this week we are finally actually going to be covering new albums, a new album singular, because 2021's excellence is not through with us yet. Because today we are going to be covering the album by tricot.
Yes.
Tricot. I'm just going to say it because there's a T in it. God damn it. There's Tricot's new album, JODEKI, at the end of last year. And we're, of course, going to be talking about arguably, the first big release of 2022, which is the Weeknd's follow-up to After Hours, which is Dawn FM. So look forward to that. And in the Record Club this week, a very, very special record club for which we are actually joined by, in our main episode and in our Record Club episode, Jakob Sanchez. Welcome to the show, longtime listener of the podcast. Lovely to have you. But we're going to be talking about a 1966 a double feature, if you will. The first time on this show since we did the Rolling Stones and Liz Phair, an episode that more people should go watch. That's a good episode.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
We're going to be talking about my record club this week, which is a combination of the Beach Boys' seminal classic, which is Pet Sounds, and of course the Beatles' classic album, Revolver. We're going to be talking about both those albums, maybe which albums we prefer over the other ones, and just 1966 as a whole.
Yeah.
So it's a big week this week.
Yes.
And it's been a big week because we have had, Ryley, you released a big-ass video. You released your video,
the shortest video on the channel in several months.
True, but it's an endeavor from a single person, so I like to think of that as like a big thing.
Yeah,
you did a great job, by the way. It's great. It's on the discography of Jimmy World. Go watch that if you haven't. Also recently, in terms of uploads for the channel, we before that had covered Devin Townsend's Ocean Machine in the previous week's Record Club, and we talked about the Richard Dawson and Eon Station album from the end of last year, so go check those out and get caught up if you haven't. But without further ado, let's go.
As per usual, we kick off each episode by talking about what we have been listening to in the past week. Jake, why don't you kick us off? As per normal, what have you been listening to recently?
Basically, it's gotten, like, I had to get back into the swing of things because, like, in December, we kind of had a period there where we were just kind of focusing on list videos, peripheral content, all that shit. So I had to lock myself back into the mode where I can just, like, listen to 5 albums in one sitting or whatever, which is what I normally do a lot of the time. So I ended up listening to a bunch of new shit this week that I haven't heard before. And I will go ahead and say that in sort of preparation for this, I elected to dive a little precariously just because I haven't listened to like nearly enough of his stuff. But because of a new project that I am going to be working on, I found it fitting that I need to familiarize myself with the discography of One Oh Tricks Point Never, and especially just because I loved Magic One Oh Tricks Point Never, an album we covered on the show a lot. And I did that by listening to Replica, which is great. I mean, fuck me. That is like, obviously I've had you telling me to listen to that album. August told me to listen to that album. Zach told me to listen to that album, and I finally did it. And I mean, like, I am far from an expert in this genre of music, in plunderphonics, in electronic music, all that kind of shit. But this album is so, it kind of oscillates between being really heavily atmospheric, kind of sort of haziness that really reminds me of shit like the Silent Hill 1 soundtrack, and then also goes into like really aggressive kind of jagged sampling, and it just sort of alternates between those two modes for the whole time, and each sort of aspect of that sound is really, really compelling. I'm just anxious to dive more into his stuff. I really, really love that album.
The way I like to think of that record is, it's like you're listening to, it feels like when you listen to it, like you can feel the album breathing. Like, if
Yes.
that makes any sense. Like, it feels like this kind of organism that's kind of just like expanding as you listen to it. It's really strange experience. And I will also say that I've added a different 100 Tricks Point Never album to our record club list for this year, that being the
Garden of
electro,
Delete.
yeah, the electro industrial clash fucking riot of Garden of Delete, which, yeah, we're
Yeah,
going to
I've been
be
meaning to
talking
get that
about.
too.
We're going to be talking about some more OPN coming soon. Don't worry about
Sick.
that.
Comparing
I'm
it to the
all here
Silent
for it.
Hill soundtrack was like the greatest way to have sold me on this album.
Oh, 100%. Like, I mean, generally speaking, I think it would not be a stretch to say that Daniel Lopatin has at least heard the soundtrack to something like Silent Hill 2 and really, really likes it, just because I've heard bits and pieces of that sort of soundtrack in everything he's made that I've heard so far, even like the more pop-oriented stuff. So yes, by all means, go and check that out.
I've heard Daniel Lopatin, his scores to Good Time and Uncut Gems, they have a lot of like Japanese film score influence in them too. So it would not surprise me if he was a fan of like, you know, Japanese video game music as well, especially Silent Hill. Like Akira often comes up when talking about the Uncut Gems soundtrack and especially a Good Time soundtrack as well. So yeah, wanted to add that.
Fitting
as well.
that you mentioned both of those. They might be involved in the project I'm currently working on heavily.
Yeah,
there's like also a lot of, there's some East Asian connection, I think, in like the OG vaporwave scene as well, which Daniel was a huge part of. So yeah, that it's kind of a cross-cultural sort of musical influence that's kind of bled into the West in the early sort of 2010s. It's kind of like had its day now, but like looking back on it, it's kind of like this nostalgic artifact of the late 2000s and early 2010s, that kind of vaporwave thing. But of course, what Daniel did with it was so like unique and idiosyncratic and crazy.
Awesome. I heard a remix of his of Toto's Africa, where it was like I think that was one of the first things that got like that I had heard from OPN before I really knew who he was.
Wow, I have to check that out. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Same. Well, fuck me. That'll be interesting. On a complete whim, I think it's because our friend April said something about it, and like subconsciously a couple hours later, this made me listen to it, just because it's a band I meant to listen to forever, just because they're often compared to a lot of my favorite 90s bands, and that being Pavement. I listened to their album Terror Twilight, their last record, I believe it is, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's their final album.
And I loved it. Not to like, I haven't listened to their earlier stuff, so obviously I can't like make any declarative statements here or anything, but like this sound feels like the definitive slacker rock sound. It has those kind of winding, arcing riffs that feel kind of languished and like, but like that's really cool about it. There's a lot of atmosphere there. The songwriting is irreverent, but also really, really patently emotional, and it's just like great on all fronts. Apparently it's their weakest project, which is like,
well, there's I know a lot of people who like that record has its own like real strong fans, and it's definitely one of the cases of like, for fans of the band, it's like one of those things where like they only put out 5 albums, something has to be at the bottom of the list. And it's one of the more unique records, because it is one of the more sort of polished and sort of like spacious albums they've made, notably produced by Nigel Godrich of Radiohead fame. So like he produced that like in between making OK Computer and Kid A. So like it has his fingerprints on it as well. Whereas their earlier records, which I'm admittedly more fond of, are like a little more sort of aggressive and a little sort of noisier and really kind of like wear the stripes of the garage rock and like sort of really scrappy late 80s Dinosaur Jr. and then sort of Nirvana-esque influence on that sort of sound of music. Although it's like, yeah, it has its own sort of flavor, and it won't, their records won't be for everyone, but it's a nice and pleasant surprise, Jake, that you've kind of found a Pavement record that you immediately like off the bat, because I don't know, it wasn't I wouldn't have presumed that would be your kind of band, but it's nice that they are.
I think it's really more or less just chalked down to me not listening to a lot of music like that, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure I would like all of it. It's funny though that they were like, I read in Stephen Hyden's book, Your Favorite Band is Killing Me. Or it was it that book? Oh, I don't fucking remember. It's the one where he talks about all the rivalries.
Yes.
And he talked about the one between Pavement and Smashing Pumpkins.
And
now, like, retrospectively, first of all, the beef between those two bands is fucking hilarious because it really just goes down to the fact that Billy Corgan was and has always been a complete fucking pariah who is just like it is so easy to bother him that I'm like kind of awestruck that more bands didn't feud with the Smashing Pumpkins, frankly. But like in that, he sort of prefaced it as being like, this is a more character-oriented clash, and it didn't really have to do with the fact that their music is similar. Like everybody compares them a lot, but it's because of this rivalry. And it's like, yeah, other than the fact that they're both very guitar heavy, Smashing Pumpkins and Pavement, like, not really.
So Jake, like, this is a beautiful coincidence and a beautiful example of like how our brains are just so in sync. Because I've been listening to a podcast that Stephen did a few years ago called Rivals. And essentially it's like a podcast version of that book where there's like an hour-long episode on each of the sort of rivalries. And one of the episode I listened to this week, I've got it right up here on my podcast app, is Smashing Pumpkins versus Pavement. It's a great podcast episode. I highly recommend it. And it's basically just like a psychological analysis of Billy Corgan, basically, and how he refuses to let shit go. And like, because what the nature of this beef is that Pavement like had an offhand lyric in their song Cut Your Hair off of their album Crooked Rain in 1994.
That's right.
And there's a lyric in that song where like Stephen Malkmus did this really kind of like silly line where he was kind of like dissing Smashing Pumpkins, and he called them like nature boys that don't have no function. He basically just called them pretentious, but in this really kind of like hilariously tongue-in-cheek way. And it was such an offhand lyric, and it could have been about any band that were sort of popular at the time. And Billy
I was going to say, this would be like if Billy Joel Armstrong from fucking Green Day had a feud with Rivers Cuomo because of Pinkerton. Like,
well, it's even more sort of like, it's even more petty and insubstantial than that, though, because it's just one random lyric on a song. And sorry, it wasn't
go to the Green Day concert.
It wasn't the song.
Never heard them.
Sorry, let me correct myself. It wasn't Cut Your Hair. It was Range Life was the song. But anyway, and basically, Billy Corgan held a grudge about this for the rest of his career. He essentially got them kicked off of supporting them or like following them at Lollapalooza in '95, I think. He continually brought it up in interviews. And like he talked about like, and the podcast was great because it was just this really kind of deep insight into like who Billy Corgan is as a person and why he views the world in the way that he does. But anyway, that's a really nice coincidence that you bring that up because I've had it on the brain this week as well.
Oh yeah, that was all I could fucking think about during that. And like, I don't know, it's just funny to see where all this shit kind of stems from at the end of the day. Oh, one thing is that I just talk about this as sort of a nebulous thing is that like, if you have listened to these segments or just know me in general, you know, I'm a huge, huge fan of the mostly ambient, but also soundtrack production worker, musician, Harold Budd. I introduced to his work with Robin Guthrie, who was with Cocteau Twins on the soundtrack to Mysterious Skin. And little did I know a while back when I was going through their catalog that like, not only had they collaborated before, but they have really, really like respectable catalogs of music in their own right. And I never really like dived into that properly just because I got so fucking obsessed with The Pearl, which he did with Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. But I've been listening to both a mixture of Bud and Guthrie stuff and Cocteau Twins. The Bud and Guthrie thing I want to show out is that they kind of have a plus sign Damnation Deliverance thing going on with their albums that were released right after each other, which evoke the same feeling as when I look at both Sign and Plus because they're like the same color with like the circles, but they're a little different. And those albums are After the Night Falls and Before the Day Breaks. which are, I mean, unsurprisingly, two absolutely fantastic ambient records from two of the greatest minds in this genre. Again, easy to recommend. If you like shit like his stuff with Eno, like Ambient 4 or The Pearl, or you like any of Blood and Guthrie's shit or Cocteau Twins, will be all about this. I can't listen to them separately anymore. They're kind of one thing to me now, but they're just deeply relaxing, hugely atmospheric, floating through the solar system kind of ambient shit. So my favorite kind. But also I kind of half did a Cocteau Twins dive last year, end of 2020, and I never really went through their whole catalog. So I just tracked down their entire discography, EPs, compilations, albums, downloaded all of them. And I've been re-listening to some of them, but listening to a lot of their EPs, which are unsurprisingly fantastic. Kind of like the slow dive EPs is that they're all 20 minutes and change, but they all have some of the best songs that the band ever made on all of them. So 100% worth looking into. I think my favorite of them so far is probably Sunburst and Snowblind is very, very good. That's one I would recommend very highly. As well as the fact that I listened to The Moon and the Melodies once again, because I'm pretty sure that's going to end up being my favorite Cocteau Twins album still, and Heaven in Las Vegas, which is a close second. And I re-listened to Treasure, and that's one of the the huge Cocteau Twins albums that everybody puts up there. And I think that's a very good album, but honestly, I would be lying if I said that, I can certainly understand why somebody would enjoy that one more than the others. I can't explain why I would, because, Treasure is a very good album. Heaven in Las Vegas is better. So, I don't know what it is with Treasure specifically. I really like the back half of that album, but the front half is that's kind of Liz Fraser at it kind of just feels like she's trying to be Kate Bush here, and it doesn't always work. It sometimes sounds a little teeny tiny bit annoying.
I love every time you call her Liz Fraser. It always gets me.
Oh, really? I didn't know that was not a common thing to do.
It's Fraser, but obviously Fraser, and it just cracks me up every time.
I have never heard it pronounced the other way, so this is a first for me. Love. I can't read.
Maybe it is pronounced Fraser, but I know it's spelled differently, so
You're probably right.
I want it to be Liz Fraser now. That's
I mean, it would be tossed salad and scrambled eggs. I want the Cocteau Twins cover of the Frasier theme song right now. Give it to me. Wouldn't it all say no to that? But Cocteau Twins, great band. I want to listen to everything they've done again. I think the other major albums I've heard from them are Victoria Land, Bluebell Knoll, and
have you heard Head Over Heels?
No, actually, I've not heard Head Over Heels, but that's one of the higher rated ones, so I'm anxious to check that out.
Right up there.
And it's not technically considered an album, but I love The Pink Opaque. That's a great project. Everybody should listen to that one. But mostly just sort of EPs with them before I go back and do their proper stuff.
Sorry, I was going to say, a lot of those dream poppy bands like Cocteau Twins and Slowdive also come to mind. They just have a shit ton of EPs and buried and on album shit that a lot of people don't ever discover because they just look at the albums. So it's a lot of it with both of those bands. I think we're lucky in that we have compilations that put them all together. But
that's why I really sought those out.
Definitely, if you're getting into those bands, don't just automatically disregard that material because a lot of it is just as good as the album material.
Slowdive has some EPs that are better than their first album, frankly.
Well, my favorite Cocteau Twins release is the Spangle Maker EP. That's just a 10 out of 10. Good one.
That's Pearly Dewdrops, right?
Yeah, Pearly Dewdrops and Pepper Tree.
The greatest song ever recorded.
Yeah, that's a top 10 EP of all time for me, and just perfect.
6. Also, I finally got around to continuing my journey through Animal Collective that was spurred on by both Ryley and Zach. I listened to Strawberry Jam, which I loved it, unsurprisingly. It's I mean, like, what can be said about an album like this that, first of all, you all didn't already say, so I won't dwell on it too long, but I will say that, like, it's like, again, it's that thing you and Zach said when you were talking about, like, two bands could say that they cited Animal Collective as a main inspiration, and those two bands could sound nothing alike. Well, to that, I present to you Feels and Strawberry Jam, which, you know, other than the presence of AV Tear, could not be more different. It's just like, yeah, they have vaguely electronic shit in it, but it's like, one is this kind of vibier, atmospheric thing, and then this is like it's like a pop album if you put it in the microwave for too long, and it sounds all like fuzzy. It's like, I would describe it as like dumping TV static into my ear, but like in a good way.
It's
they're
just
just
practically a noise record at points. Like,
it fucking Fireworks, Forever Green, fucking, yeah. Like there are so many of their best things, like best like songs on here. Obviously, like, Animal Collective records are dense, and I need more time with it and other records, just because I'm sure this will probably go up like Feels did. But it's just so cool to keep going through this band, and each time I get something that's like so far removed from anything else that they've made that it just continually feels magical. It's just like, it doesn't sound anything like Spirit They've Gone or Feels or Centipede Hurts or whatever. It's just like, it's always fun and cool.
Jake, so, I'm so psyched that like 6 weeks on from that video coming out, you're still like continuing to dive deeper into this band. Like, you have no idea how much that's like, how awesome that is to me. And like, yeah, Strawberry Jam is like, it's such a sensory overload the first time you hear it that like you just kind of have to.
The screaming on the opening track, which,
well,
hollering,
and I see it in, I think I see it in the video as well. Like, that song, that first song they recorded, that was the first song I ever heard from that band. Yep. When I was like fucking 11 or 10 years old. And that shit literally rewired my brain, and the whole album just kind of is on that level as well. I think when Zach and I did our aggregated best Animal Collective songs list, Forever and Green was like the number one. That the wildest moments of that album are just like so breathtakingly exciting that it's just, it's so addictive to me. Like, that shit that's my fucking ocean machine, that album.
That makes complete and total sense. Honestly, I would, like, not even necessarily like in sound, but like what it reminded me of a lot was like, if you put every Sweet Trip album in a blender and you hit frappe, you'll get Strawberry Jam somehow. It's just awesome. I'm also going back to the work of David Bowie because he's like my favorite musical artist ever, and it's been a long time since I've heard many of his classic records, one of which, of course, being Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. It's great. Moving on. Like,
S tier.
Agreed. That is an S tier Bowie for me. Fucking Teenage Wildlife might be my favorite Bowie
song. Teenage Wildlife is my favorite song on there. It's so fucking good. Like, I think when I rediscovered Heroes and how I went back to that album and I was just like, this perfect. I don't know why I ever thought it wasn't, but it is. And then now I'm just kind of like, well, time to give everything another shot again because cool. But other than that, I listened to I re-listened to because of Ryley's video, of course, I listened to Integrity Blues by Jimmy Eat World, an album that I had heard before on the recommendation of Morgan when he and I both kind of started getting into Jimmy Eat World. And I always thought that album was really good. It was just something that, like, I guess I had been so used to the version of the Futures of era of Jimmy Eat World. So it was a sound that was so polar opposite of that I think it just kind of bounced off me initially, and now I kind of think that might be my favorite of theirs so far. The fucking production from the guy who did the most recent Deaf Heaven album and the M83 album, Hurry Up We're Drinking,
Justin Meldal Johnson, one of the best producers working today, unquestionably,
and he makes that album sound goddamned terrific. There's not a miss on that entire album. It's a distinctly weirder venture in the band's discography, which I think is probably why most people wouldn't consider it like up tier Jimmy Eat World. But I think that's part of the reason that I really enjoy it. But Who knows? Another band that I just need to rip through.
It's like a perfect example to me of an album that I've probably heard it like, I don't know, 6 or 7 times now. It gets better every time I listen to it. Like this band just has this fucking baked into their DNA, this innate ability to craft just beautiful and brilliant hooks. And just like different songs will click with me each time I listen to it as well. Like I've had like 4 or 5 different like favorite songs on that record. And like I can see why Morgan has it at a 5-star album. Like I can see yes. I can, because I'm not quite at that level yet, but I could see it like climbing. One of the most overwhelming, like common responses I got on Reddit to my video was a lot of people telling me that I should have put Integrity Blues higher, and it was already like 5 on my list. Cool. So there's a lot of love for that record. That. And I can see it growing even more on me. Like it was really close. It was almost between that album and Bleed American. Like they could have gone the other way on my ranking, and it was very close. So yeah, I would say if some of Jimmy Eat World's earlier shit, classic shit, you should check the classic shit out first. But if that doesn't land completely with you, Integrity Blues might be your thing.
Yeah, I mean, fucking excellent record. I'm gonna shout out one record here that namely because it's an underheard record. It was a 2021 release. Again, the specter of the greatest year for music I've been alive for, I guess, keeps haunting me. That is, I discovered, partially because of Ryley helping me out, making a little custom Rate Your Music chart that blends shoegaze and progressive rock, which I got a hankering for after I listened to Steven Wilson's Insurgents for the 58,000th time, which is probably my favorite Steven Wilson solo album now. I think it's slightly surpassed Hand Cannot Erase, but I mean, they're both perfect, so I can fucking shut up. That said, the band in question is You Do Right, which is you with 2 O's and do with 2 O's, which is a terrible name, which makes this very hard to recommend. It sucks, but
it's a classic Can song.
Year, there you go. Their album, Don't Think You Can Escape Your Purpose, which is their first album, I think, and oh man, the whole, like, I will say the A side is definitely the stronger side. That said, this would have been like, if I could have picked a different album to be my number 1 on our overlooked albums list that Ryley and I did, I'd now pick that one, just because, like, I don't even necessarily think it's better than the Wolves on the Throne Room album, but I think it's like, it's less heard of and Absolutely. It's more interesting. It is like, the first song is like this really atmospheric tone setter that's like really great. And then the second one is like To Be Kind era Swans by way of My Bloody Valentine. And it's like every single song, you're just kind of like, whoa, this is cool. And I love the shit out of that. Please go listen to it. Okay. And the last thing I will mention is that I've listened to an album that I think came to my attention because of viewer and friend of the podcast Pokey Gem once shouting this album out, but I listened to Goat by the Jesus Lizard. Dude, what the fuck? Where has this album been my whole life? I'm angry. This shit slaps so hard. I compared it, like, I think I said to Ryley that I was just like, this is like if Daughters got like jazzy and also was mixed in with like Frank Zappa doing Hot Rats. This whole thing is just one of the most exciting, eccentric, but like nonetheless blood pumping noise rock albums ever. If anybody who hasn't heard that, please, for the love of God, just fix it.
One of the most innovative
Steve Albini produced album, I think.
One of the most innovative fucking noise rock bands of all time. Jake, I swear to God, if you're on the verge of a like classic late 80s, early 90s noise rock, post-hardcore like phase, I will be so over the moon, because there's so many records in that vein that I think you'll really fucking love. And like
kicks ass.
Jesus Lizard, specifically on Goat and Liar, which are like their 2 best albums. Like, you're right, like Daughters essentially cribbed that sound and like just sharpened up the production and made it a little bit kind of like moodier. But what I would recommend is like the definitive band of this era, which is Drive Like Jehu. Fucking, they only put out 2 albums. Right. They listen to listen to them, because I think they are like the logical next step from Jesus Lizard, who are like kind of more stripped down and like punchy, whereas Jesus Lizard whereas Drive Like Jehu kind of took that sound and they made it more kind of like denser and sort of progressive and like more in the vein of post-hardcore music. So shit, man, like you're on the verge of like of an era of like amazing music.
That should be like a universal hit, but I just listened to that and I was just like, if Morgan hasn't heard this, he really should.
I mean, who wouldn't want to listen to a band called the Jesus Lizard?
I mean, it's pretty dope, I won't lie, but like of it, I was just like, this is also like super grungy and shit, and I just like, it's just such a great meat and potatoes fun rock album. And fucking like, when I say that the sound is similar to Daughters, it is like minus the kind of mathiness that they get into, but like, my God, Alexis Marshall just literally stole the vocal delivery from the lead singer of the Jesus Lizard. It is the same in that like it occasionally kind of like he sounds like he's doing like a rockabilly pastiche, but it's like cool. The album's wild.
I tell you what, one more thing, Unwound. That's it. You'll fucking adore them.
Yeah, that's the band I've been meaning to get into too.
Yeah. Aside from the stuff we're reviewing today, I only had one first listen of note in the last 7 days, and it's like a 40-minute album. So, but the good thing is, it's fucking fantastic. What it is so. I love when this kind of happens. Is that randomly, one of you guys or someone in the chat will like suddenly announce that they're listening to a band that I used to be like really into as a teenager and haven't thought about in years. And that happened this week when Connor announced that he was listening to the classic, legendary psych rock, fucking experimental noise rock drone legends, Boredoms. They're a Japanese band. And they put out a string of amazing releases in the late 90s and the early 2000s. One of the most innovative albums of the 90s, Vision Creation New Sun, was theirs. 100% recommend that to anyone who's got any interest in kind of like avant-garde experimental forms of rock music. But they've also put out some really amazing releases and EPs where they kind of play around with like the hypnotic qualities of guitar-based noise music, essentially. And so Connor was listening to the last album that they put out in 2004, which is a record called Sea Drum / House of Sun, which is just 2 20-minute tracks that are titled Sea Drum and House of Sun, respectively. And this album is like, I mean, it's near transcendental in terms of like the state of mind that it puts you in. Like Sea Drum is this gorgeous piece of like expansive psychedelic bliss that just completely builds and builds and builds and just kind of just absolutely billows outward like a plume of fucking thick smoke. And instead of like fucking, carbon monoxide, it's like fucking the sickest guitar shit you've ever heard. And like a fucking Japanese guy named I going fucking nuts. And that alone is worth the price of admission. And then the second track here,
you have Japanese girls.
Oh my God.
Yes. And then the second track here is slightly different. It's much less sort of explosive. It is a single sort of sustained guitar-based drone for 20 minutes, but with these amazingly colorful textures just being played and toyed around with underneath it. I think the side A track, Sea Drum, there's a potential for that to kind of overshadow side B, but even if you just put side B on in and of itself and just listen to this 20-minute drone, I think it's an incredible experience. And so, yeah, this is a fantastic release. Highly recommend it, alongside Vision Creation New Sun and Super Roots 7, which are the other 2 great Boredoms releases that I highly recommend.
Oh, I downloaded Vision Creation New Sun the other week. I totally didn't make the connection that was Boredoms. Okay, yep. I've been meaning to listen to that for a while now.
Yeah, that's a seminal record. I think that you'll really enjoy that experience. But yeah, Sea Drum, House of Sun, if people out there are looking for to experience this band but want something a little bit more sort of condensed and like friendly, then I would 100% recommend Sea Drum / House of Sun. It is probably the most accessible release that I've heard from this band. So gets a ringing endorsement from me. Other than that, I really have just been listening to obviously the records we're going to be talking about in this week's episodes, but also the discography of Jimmy Eat World, so I could do that video. I've spent some more time with the Eon Station record that we reviewed last week, and I want to take a moment to say as well that we were very, very like humbled to have Kevin Whelan, aka Eon Station himself, watch our video and
Mr. Station.
And directly,
God damn it!
And directly reply to us on Twitter, as well as following our Twitter account. And someone who appears to be Kevin Whelan's brother, Greg Whelan, who is also in the Wrens, followed us as well. So that was kind of like, I still haven't really processed the fact that the guy...
Ironically, not for our review of the Meadowlands, too. How funny.
Well, in many ways, it's more meaningful that it's for this, because this is like something really, really personal to him. And yes. and he said that he really, really enjoyed our video, and that he was, and I can only assume that, you know, if he followed us on Twitter, he may well have subscribed to the channel as well, in which case, if you're watching, hello, Kevin. I hope that we can continue putting out stuff that you enjoy. So yeah, that was really...
Morgan coming back in that shot looks like he's been crying for 3 minutes. Just came back and was like, all right, you bitches.
I'm not, you know, you didn't have to say that.
Well, Morgan, like, you, as much as me or Jake in that segment last week, were really like heartfelt and like spoke really, really well about that record. So that's to me like one of the most validating moments of this whole podcast thing is fucking Kevin Whelan watching our video, not just watching our video, but actually like saying, good job, guys. That was awesome.
Yeah, like that's something that I have to like not process, or else I'll get in my own head about it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Just like,
yeah. One more thing actually that I will mention, since I have a pretty light segment here this week. I talked about this in this segment last week, but I want to kind of redux it a little bit, is that I've spent a little more time with the new Burial EP, Anti-Dawn, which I did say, you know, some very lightly kind of positive, but also kind of middling things about last week. I've spent a little bit more time with this EP, and I do think that I've undersold it a little bit. It's a real grower. I think it needs to be, like a lot of Burial's music, it's best experienced in a particular kind of context, which is in darkness with no distractions, because it's less sort of, this is going to sound dismissive, and I really don't mean it to be, because I mean this as the most accurate description of it as I can come up with. It's less musical than anything else he's done. It is more about kind of pure ambience and sound design and soundscapes. There's obviously plenty of musical moments on it, but it is this kind of formless, like, again, like 43-minute thing. Like, it's 5 tracks, but it feels like one sort of 43-minute piece that starts as a kind of like, you know, disassembled series of sounds and vocal loops that eventually, by the time you get to the end of the project, have kind of swelled into these gently kind of devastating and beautiful little moments. It is not a project for people with little patience. It is a project for people who want to experience something that is unique, that has a sound design that is quite intoxicating and quite beautiful, but it is very measured and it is very slow. So, you know, it might not be for you, but if you've enjoyed Burial's music in the past, I would say give it a shot. A lot of people have been really dismissive of it, you know, including myself initially. But the more patience I give it, the more listens I give it, the more I can appreciate what Burial is doing here. He no longer has interest in making like kind of garagey, dub-y, like heavy beats anymore. He's just not in that phase of his career anymore. It's not something that interests him. Maybe someday it will again. He is interested in ambience. He is interested in soundscapes. He is interested in the power of vocal samples and the power of static and atmosphere and all these kinds of things. And what he's interested in doing with them is evoking this super vivid and visual sense of place. Like these songs are called things like Strange Neighborhood and Upstairs Flat. And you get this real sense of like vivid place when you listen to them. And, you know, once I sort of gave myself over to that and let it kind of wash over me while I was like lying in bed in the darkness with my headphones on, I got it. I really felt that I got it. And I think these songs are being misunderstood in a similar way to like the early songs on the Tunes compilation have been misunderstood as kind of like empty ambience and stuff.
The best ones.
Yeah.
Best ones.
And these new songs are even more formless than those tracks, but I think that they're trying to do a similar sort of thing. And they have a similar sort of power once you kind of just melt into them. So yeah, all I want to say is to people out there, give Anti-Dawn a chance. It deserves some patience, especially if you're a fan of Burial. And I think that it might unravel for you as it has for me. So yeah, that is my week. Now, Jacob, as our guest, you of course have the center stage here to talk about any music you like. It doesn't have to be in the last 7 days, but anything that you've been listening to recently that you want to shout out or that you think is really cool, go for it.
So recently, well, not recently, this has been like kind of a long project for me and a friend, Ray, who may be watching the video. Hello, Ray. So we've been going through the Mountain Goats discography. We try to, like, it's not a daily or weekly thing. Like, we just go whenever we can. And recently, we listened to Tallahassee, which is a motherfucker of a folk record. Like, some of the fucking darkest breakup songs I had ever heard. The song Game Shows Touch Our Lives is like one of the most beautifully lyrically written songs I have ever heard in my life. And John Darnielle, like, okay, so we had listened to that after All Hail West Texas.
Yeah.
And so hearing like his voice in such a clearer soundscape was honestly like extremely mesmerizing. It felt much more freeing. And I love
Dude, just you fucking wait until you get deeper into this discography, into records like fucking Life of the World to Come and Beat the Champ and like the real hi-fi shit where they start becoming like fucking ornate and like instrumentally dense and shit. You're
dark in here.
Or dark in here, like what a genius John Darnielle is.
The only one I had heard before was The Sunset Tree, which is a very personal album to me. Like, I think that's kind of like the casual Mountain Goats listener. Like, everybody knows The Sunset Tree and stuff like that. Which is an amazing record. But hearing Tallahassee in the context of where John Darnielle had been before, I think, honestly, his storytelling is some of the best in music. What else? I re-listened to the first album I ever heard this year was which was a re-listen, Promises by Floating Points, Farrah Sanders, and the London Symphony Orchestra. And listening to that record on again only made me appreciate it more now, knowing where everything was going to go. Brilliant.
In the immortal words of Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club, I am drowning. There is no sign of land.
You're coming down with me, hand in a lovable hand.
I hope we die.
If I
hope we both die.
If I can like right the ship just a little bit here, I want to say that I've come back to Promises a few times as well, like across the course of the last year, and like I believe that in the future that album is going to be regarded in the same way as like Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians, or like Philip Glass's Glassworks, two records which no doubt influenced Floating Points' compositional style hugely. And it's like you have that sort of minimalist compositional style, and then you put fucking Farrah Sanders on top of it, doing the most lyrical and beautiful sort of sax passages that he's ever laid to tape, or at least in the last 50 years, right? It's a special thing.
It's oh god. I remember like because like my grandma was over and I played like she was like play me some music. And I'm like, oh, I think you'll like this. She was really into it and like really because like she likes jazz, but she also likes ambient. So I'm like, okay, that's like a no fucking trainer, right?
Based grandma.
Nanas love ambient.
Put on try repetite, will you?
Nanas are really into fucking Harold Budd.
Because like she'll put on Tangerine Dream or something like that, and
fuck yeah,
and like I'll be like, yeah.
Nana be like, let's listen to Sun.
Imagining my grandma rocking out to Phaedra on Oxygen.
Oh god. Oh my god. But yeah, love that record. Love that fucking record. Recently, okay, because I'm part of a Discord server, the Mike the Snare Discord server. We'll like every month we'll go through an artist discography. Right now we're on everything. So recently I've been listening to the first 3 albums from them. Man Alive is good. It's not my personal favorite though. And
it's no one's personal favorite except for me.
Oh, but like I will say,
even that's not
the
true.
1-2 punch.
Well, I like what I mean is that I feel like I'm the only person in the world who has that album at a 10.
I know what you mean.
August is behind you.
I'm just
not with a 10, but
yeah, it's just
he thinks this is best.
August has like 3 10s.
But yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not one of them.
Continue, Jacob. I want to hear your thoughts on these records.
Okay, so I will say this about Man Alive: the 1-2 punch at the something I've been noticing with everything is that their closing tracks, no matter what I think of the album so far, they always fucking hit. And my 2 favorite everything songs up to that point were, hang on, let me look at the fucking track list, make sure I'm not. It was Tin and Wait.
Yeah.
Both of which, like again, I was feeling like mixed to positive, but then those last 2 tracks, especially with Jonathan Higgs is his name, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Higgs with the most based Twitter account of all time, fucking just singing, and the fucking instrumentation at the end of Wait, the outro, that shit.
The way it just kind of like clips and repeats and just kind of breaks in half. It's so fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And what did you think of Arc and Get to Heaven?
Arc I liked a little less, although Cough Cough is a great song. The Peaks, again, is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And something I've appreciated about everything is how lyrical and dense Higgs is as a performer. It's like but how many syllables he can actually fit into things, but like having like this David Byrne-esque delivery as well. So he sounds like very erratic and weird and strange and kind of beautiful as a result.
And I mean, he also has like the most amazing falsetto of the last like 20 years of music. So, and he uses it. I was having a conversation with my friend Laura, who's a huge Everything fan, the other day. And she was like, I just realized the other day that there's not a single Everything song where John Higgs doesn't use his falsetto at some point. And I'm like, fuck, you're right. And it's like, it's that powerful, is that he can't.
I like it when he raps. That one's really good.
Well, he does a lot of that on Get to Heaven.
Then he sunken monkey chin.
Yeah.
Get to Heaven surprised me. I mean, I had heard from people that this was considered to be like the best Everything album, but I was not prepared for how fucking good this was. Even though, again, I liked their albums, but I wasn't big into them. Just from like the opening track alone to The Blade, like that, like when those guitars come in, I was just like, Jesus Christ! Like already we are like at honestly to me a level above what those last 2 records were, and then Distant Past as well. But Blast Doors was the song that really awakened the third eye in me, and I was just like, okay, this is a really fucking great band.
Oh, I didn't have to school you.
I supposed to get them, make it harder for the sniper.
My girlfriend and I have been listening to that album in the car more recently, and she loves that album now, which I'm so happy I was able to. Like, that's the perfect, like, gateway album to the world of alternative music, honestly.
Absolutely.
It's just like,
it's like so many hooks in it.
If you find like Talking Heads to be a bit too intimidating because you've been listening to like pop music your whole life, get into Everything because those first fucking 7 tracks on Get to Heaven is just like, oh, this is the best pop album of the decade.
Yeah, and then and then like the end, the home stretch of the record, you're like, oh, I'm hurting now. My favorite moment on that whole album is actually in Blast Doors. Like it's the bridge in that song when like the drums kind of like go like half speed and he's just like doing all falsetto and he's barely like intelligible, and it's like the most kind of fucking eerie, stratospheric, like interstellar shit. And then the song kind of slams back in again, and it's just like, that's the magic of the movies.
Yeah. That's kind of what I feel like. It's interesting you mentioned their drummer too, who is an absolute beast and has not given a single weak performance on any of these tracks. I'm looking forward to seeing to listening to their last 2 records.
I'm very curious to see what you think of those, because both of them are very underrated in all of our opinions, I would say.
Some people on this podcast think A Fever Dream is their best album.
Next up, my first 2022 release. I want to recommend all of you this record. I don't know if you've heard it. Are y'all familiar with an artist called Coca-Cola?
No, I don't think so. Spell that.
So, Cacola. So I'm really big into mashup. I'm really big into plunderphonics. I love like that sort of like hybrid art, and also I don't know, I like it for the memes sometimes, but I think there really is a true art to a great mashup. And this album is called Ruby Rose, and it is fucking bananas. Like, so like in the first like few minutes of this album, you were hearing like, because like there's different types of mashup artists. It's not all Neil Cicierega. Like there's like Girl Talk, who just makes you want to dance, and then of course there's Neil Cicierega, who wants to like troll the fuck out of you. Coca-Cola is a little bit of both. In the first minutes or so, you'll hear fucking Dream Theater, Carly Rae Jepsen, Pink, the Angry Video Game Nerd theme song, fucking.
Son of a bitch.
I'm sold.
It was like Dream Theater, Carly Rae Jepsen, Pink.
It's I don't want to spoil a lot of the surprises on that record, but I just want to say, like, okay, because like
oh no.
It's just saw that there's a mashup of Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians and Foo Fighters Everlong.
It's so fucking good.
Oh my God.
Like, I haven't caught every single sample on that record yet because it is very layered and it is very dense. But trust me, when you're on like along for the ride, you will want to know where a lot of this shit goes. And then I guess the last thing I'll mention right now, I guess like in terms of re-listen, Souvlaki by Slowdive, Sometimes I May Be Introvert by Little Sims, both of which I adore, fantastic records. And The Weeknd's discography, went through the entire, like I listened, the only one I don't think I've listened to before this in full is Kissland. Like everything else
Not missing much.
Before. I thought it was fine. It was like at best, I liked a couple of songs, but I guess we can. But Trilogy still whips, and After Hours still whips.
Yeah,
and,
agreed.
Starboy is a little underrated.
Well, it's almost as if you're born to do this podcast, Jacob, because you've just given me a gift of a segue right now into the first review of our episode today, which is, of course, now this record was preceded, I believe, by the single Take My Breath, which came out last year at some
Would you
point.
like Dawn or
Longtime viewers will remember that the first album that I ever really like got into and was like, that was like a new release that I was like pushing on the podcast, was the Weeknd's After Hours. Just because we had started the podcast like, you know, midway into the pandemic, and it came out in like March that year. So we had already kind of like missed the window on that. That said, After Hours was a really big moment for Abel. If you're not familiar with The Weeknd, which is basically impossible now, even though I'll say that Abel's kind of in a strange place in the musical world. He's got like there's sort of like a decade span basically where he kind of took over, you know, mainstream pop with a lot of singles and a lot of features on a lot of big artists. But before that, how he came up in the scene was, I think it was more or less through Drake when he was first coming up. Mm-hmm. And he had his mixtape trilogy, which is House of Balloons, Thursday, and Echoes of Silence.
All of which turned 10 last year.
Yeah, a fucking decade of those. And like, that was something that got like, they attained mainstream popularity, but not so much so as like, they were really kind of like an underground thing. They were a little bit more like, you know, indie kind of blogosphere of the 2010s, being like, oh wow, this dude, like, look at this Beach House sample, and fucking like everybody kind of got him a ground floor. Well, and then he made
it seems silly now because like those mixtapes were blown up by Pitchfork, like were the reason The Weeknd got big initially. When you consider what the kind of musician and like the kind of popularity he has now, that's like bizarre to think about. But that's how I became aware of The Weeknd in like 2013, is that those mixtapes were being super hyped up. And now to see where he is like, so
they're
nuts.
Like, and they're also like, in many ways they were kind of the shape of pop to come, like before that wave really like hit, I think, with the sort of the melancholia of pop that kind of got issued in post Lorde in the second half of the decade, in that the mixtape trilogy is kind of not pop music at all. I don't even really know how to classify it these days. It's really more of like a hybrid of like, you know, older like dance stuff, industrial flourishes, and like in Thursday there's shit that's like straight up noise music. But you know, that's like a really indie kind of thing. And then he made albums like Kissland and albums like Beauty Behind the Madness, where he had songs like fucking The Hills and shit. He got really popular off of those. But then I think he kind of reached a certain apex in Starboy, where he had some singles that were super popular. He collabed with Daft Punk a few times on that album, which is it's kind of a mixed bag that favors positivity for me. I really like a solid 60% of that album, I think, is great. The other is just kind of middling. But so this decade, really, up until 2020, Abel's been kind of adrift. Like, he started at one place, he ended at another, but it was sort of up in the air as to whether or not he would, like, you know, what's he going to do? Is he going to double down on more pop stuff and just kind of sail off into the sunset until he doesn't become relevant anymore? Is he going to take charge and go in a completely new direction? Is he going to go back to something that's a little bit weirder? And then he elected to do something completely different with After Hours, which After Hours is an album that was basically inescapable because of Blinding Lights, which was by all means the song of the year for 2020, because it stayed at number one longer than any song has ever. Is that right?
I don't know if it's quite that extreme, but it's stayed at number one about as long as any song has, I think.
Mainly because After Hours came out in like, it simultaneously was a huge success because of those singles, but I also think it suffered from paradoxically becoming memory hold, because it was right, like, I mean, the day I stopped going to work because of COVID was the day that After Hours dropped on everybody. So that was a really successful thing. And like, you know, he comes in with like the Super Bowl performance. He's done like lots of different remixes, lots of different features. And now he's like a pop star of his own making. So the real question was, after you make this big opulent thing like After Hours, an album that I know most people generally like and think is like really, really good, but an album that genuinely means a lot to me, that I really, really love, maybe my second favorite pop album, period. I was also curious as to where he would go with his sound, whether or not he would do the sort of 80s synth pop pastiche adjacent, but not really kind of thing. Because After Hours is a lot of synth pop, but it's also a lot of other things. It showed him being as dynamic as he possibly could. There's so many different shades and palettes and production things on that album, half of which courtesy of One O Tricks Point Never, also from people like Metro Boomin. So it's a really sleek, beautiful sounding album. But seeing as he's never really stuck to one thing or another, it's just kind of like, okay, what happens after this? And so the surprise release of Dawn FM is, in retrospect, kind of not surprising, of just like, yeah, this sounds like it would be the time for him to come back with something new. And I guess to set the stage for, at least my opinion anyway, is that this was strange just because After Hours was an album that immediately, like, I was on board with the singles, but I heard that and it was just immediate love at first listen. Whereas when I listened to Dawn FM, which I will give Abel credit here, I was in a terrible mood when I first listened to this album. I had gotten a total of 3 hours of sleep. I had woken up and I put in like it was some serious one earbud ass listening. And what surprised me was that, yeah, he's kind of doubling down on the synth pop angle. And the thing is that so you could accuse of this of being like After Hours 2 or After Hours 1.5, which I kind of get, honestly. That said, it's a very different breed of synth pop and sounding pop music, because After Hours is an album that's still cloaked in the atmosphere of Trilogy. That album feels like, I mean, the first song alone feels like a synth pop rendition of something on House of Balloons. It's just caked in it. This, on the other hand, is way more like the stuff he did with Daft Punk on Starboy. It's tight, it's clean, it's focused. And initially on first listen, to me, that kind of rang as insubstantial, which is more my fault than the album's, frankly, just because it is so, in fact, different. However, once I gave it the proper listen that it deserved with a nice pair of headphones, which I do recommend because the production here is fully courtesy of Mr. One O Tricks Point Never. And yeah, it sounds expensive. It sounds glossy, and I kind of love it. It's weird just because I'm not even like a huge Daft Punk fan, even though I'm a big fan of the songs that they made with Abel, because those are like the best from that era, in my opinion. But this is still kind of a monster of its own making. That said, it's simultaneously kind of, it's a little bit like, it's both really, really consistent and just can't escape the fact that it's a little bit underwhelming, which is weird because you're going to see me give this album a pretty high score, and I really, really do. I'd say I love this album. That said, it's a very different kind of album, but it's not different enough to be something new. It really does kind of feel like After Hours 1.5. But that said, the concision of the songs here and how fully formed they are, that's what anchors everything to me. It's got this, like, my biggest issue with the album is really that the concept of it is kind of half-baked and unnecessary. I'll go ahead and get out of the way what I assume is going to be the universal uniting of perspectives on here, and just say that there are some points on this album, very, very notably, Every Angel is Terrifying, that just, why is it here? I can make an argument for the other segments on here, and I will, and I enjoy them a considerable more than I do this, because like the first half of it is like, it's vaguely musical and Abel's there, and then in the second half it's like he's like selling it as like a movie, and I'm like, Abel, I thought this was a radio station. That's not exactly the same thing. And he's just like, it's shocking, provocative, and like, I get that he's going for like a Verhoeven-esque, like ultra hyper parody commercial thing here, but it's like none of this is really on the album elsewhere, so I don't really know what kind of like flavor this is. And it's also like, why is this like 2.5 minutes, dude? I don't really know why. The album's substantial. This doesn't need to be here, especially when you place it between a bunch of songs that are really, really concise and really good, and then you just break up the flow for no real reason. I don't like love stuff that's like A Tale by Quincy, which like is sort of like, yeah, it definitely like it's not a song or anything, but I definitely think it contributes to the sort of theatricality of the character of the era that we're in. We're sort of talking about Quincy Jones and his relationship with his mother and how that sort of feeds into the inherent misogyny that he was sort of taking place in, which is a lot of the character that Abel's leaning into now. So like that I get. And the bookends of the whole, like, you're listening to Dawn FM, courtesy of fellow Canadian Jim Carrey, which like, I can't explain why, but I really like hearing the sound of that man's voice. Like it's so strange. And like the ending spoken word segment with him is actually like, I kind of like it. It's thematically, it kind of feels like a really solid arrival for the album. But like, I've kind of prefaced this by talking about everything but the actual music in a broad sense. But the real strength of this album, because I wanted to get all of the stuff that doesn't exactly click with me out of the way, is that honestly, it's really that if you just take all of the songs, the meat of this album, it's very consistent. It's probably the most consistent sonically album that he's ever made. And I don't think it's sort of the shoot for the moon ambition of After Hours is not there, which I can't really in good conscience say is something that he should have done. Maybe that's just my expectations. But when you start off with a song like Gasoline, which was definitely part of the reason why I got off with a bad foot on this, is that he comes in with a delivery that's just like he's never done before and is honestly really weird. No, shut the fuck up. This song fucking slaps. I love everything about this song. It sounds like, from the immediately dated sounding One O Tricks Point Never synths at the very, very start of this, and you have Abel delivering that weird kind of uncanny monotone in his voice that just really, really sinks in with the groove of this track, makes this such a fucking fun song. And honest to God, that's a lot of the core of why every song on here works, is that it's glossy, synth pop, it's tight, and the songwriting here is like, it's not as character oriented as the After Hours thing. This is like, the songwriting on this is genuinely like weird and specific and like funny, and I really like it. Like, it's definitely doing something a little different, but like, the way Abel is going about portraying this particular character is endlessly fascinating to me, and leaning into the almost like David Lynchian strangeness of the nocturnal nightlife that he's trying to go for. I find it very endearing, and I find a lot of these songs to have a lot of a core that's not just, you know, oh, I'm partying, but also I hate myself, blah. Like, it's got a little bit more than that, and it's got a sense of humor. It doesn't take itself too seriously, even though it's got moments where, like, Every Angel Is Terrifying, where it's like, dude, I get that you're being irreverent, but also like, stop. Like, we had a good balance before, fucking put it away. There's no, and again, comparing it to one of my favorite albums ever, this is not fair, but there's no show-stopping moments on this album, save for one. There's not a moment like Save Your Tears or In Your Eyes.
I was going to say one of our, that was on our top songs of 2020.
It was,
In Your Eyes,
because of yours truly loving that song so much. There's one exception, that being the penultimate track, Less Than Zero, legitimately one of his absolute best songs, full stop, competes with every top tier song on After Hours. Agreed. In my opinion.
Agreed.
But it is a terrific way to end the record. And then sort of go into the bookend thematic end point, and also kind of the tease of whatever this next possibly weirder segment of his career is going to be. But I find this to be a very satisfying, fully formed album that has its kinks and wonkiness, but overall is too consistent for me to really shake a stick at it. So that's the Weeknd. I'm not a Weeknd fanboy because I don't like half of his career, but this part of his career, I'm a fan of.
I'm that Weeknd.
But like, I don't want to come off as like a fanboy who's just sucking this album's dick because it like sounds good or whatever. It's just like, no, he's made plenty of shit. Like, he has this point in his career, he has made as much good music as he's made bad music. So
yeah. Jacob, I can see you're itching to get some words out on this album. So why don't you kind of compliment Jake, and I want to hear what you thought of this record and how your feelings have evolved over the week.
See, part of this, like, I was admittedly a little worried when we were gonna get Jim Carrey. This is
Yeah.
gonna be my This is gonna be my make up a guy moment in the review because
We all have them.
so okay, like because he ends on this like poem, and I was just like thinking to myself, I was like praying that he wasn't gonna go into any of his anti-vax shit or like that he usually goes into. So I was like,
What a turn that would be.
I was like, oh, he's talking about heaven. Oh, no, Jim. Okay, no, it's just like it's a nice average poem. That was probably my least favorite moment on the record, despite the fact that he makes a great radio DJ. If I had any sort of issues with this album, like I wish it leaned more into the radio station because the best moment on this record to me is when track 3, How Do You Love Me, I think it's called, like
How Do I Make You Love Me?
Yeah, How Do I Make You Love Me transitions into Take My Breath. That to me,
so
I wish there was more moments like that on the record, because something this album reminded me of. Josh Safdie, who makes a cameo appearance on this record, a while back, he did this like little synthwave kind of radio DJ thing where he basically played a lot of film scores, namely from the 80s and 90s, that were like, The Thing and Akira, and like a few, like from a couple of Michael Mann films that were all just like purely synth based, and how each one led into one another with a lot of snippets of dialogue. And I honestly wish The Weeknd kind of leaned more into it, with each track kind of like crossing into each other, because the best moments on the record were the whole 103.5, and again the transition from Take My Breath, or from How Do I Make You Love Me into Take My Breath, which, by the way, Take My Breath was like the first single that come from this record. Like, everybody thought it was an After Hours B-side. It turns out it was the lead single to Dawn FM. The extended version eclipses the single version, like fucking out of the water. Like that little like vocaloid thing that he does, or the like, little vocalization where she, like on the like right before the first verse, I was just like, Jesus, I want to be like in a car like doing coke while fucking thinking about how don't do coke, kids. Anyways, but just like thinking about like, oh man, like just like under like the neon lights in like the Florida sunset or some shit, like, because that song was fucking brilliant. And Gasoline, I liked his croon on there. It sounded like he was trying to imitate like Depeche Mode or New Order again, like any of those like 80s
Depeche Mode. That's the comparison I've been looking for all week, and you nailed it. It sounds just like Songs of Faith and Devotion.
Yeah, so like I liked it on there. And another comparison I'd like to make is that if After Hours was The Weeknd's Disintegration, then this is his Wish. Like much more kind of like this, like a Disintegration was about, The Cure, like Robert Smith like turning 30, and he like, okay, he has to make his masterpiece. He has to do it. And so he's leaning into every single emotion he has, and just like pouring everything into making Disintegration. That's what I felt about After Hours, and on re-listen, After Hours is like, like it's, I wish I put that album higher on my albums of 2020, because it's such a close to perfect pop record for me.
Fantastic album.
Right on.
And Wish is kind of like The Cure, like rightfully on top, much more comfortable in their zone. And I get the feeling that that's where Abel is too. Like he's much more comfortable. Like this, like he talks about in a recent interview, he had said he had gotten a lot sober, like much more sober. He's clean finally from hard drugs. And right now, this feels like the product of that. He is much more comfortable with where he is in his life. Like there are, of course, a couple of songs about pain, but there is something there. Like there is a kind of beauty to this record where he just feels like he's finally like, all right, I'm more complete than I was, like 2 albums ago. And
there's a clarity that comes from that I think really shows on this album, both sonically and emotionally, that makes this a really different experience, that makes him feel like he's really got a handle on what he's good at.
Mhm. And I think also OPM produced this, but I also want to shout out, of course, legendary pop producer Max Martin, giving
Yep.
giving the hooks on this thing the grandiosity that they need. And Less Than Zero, yeah, that's like song of the year so far.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
my biggest comparison is like This Is As I Melt With You, just like a big explosive alt rock song, like with a pop
I'm a
chorus for
piece
the
of shit.
but it's like,
it's
so amazing.
I was concerned for a bit when I saw it's called Less Than Zero, where I was like, are we gonna do like a whole Bret Easton Ellis thing right
I
now?
had the same thought. The beautiful thing about that song, which is also incidentally my favorite song on the record, is like it's the kind of song that he has written a bunch of times now. Like essentially, it's like the "I Feel It Coming," it's that sort of song, and he's just really good at writing that kind of song where he just really leans into this kind of genuinely soulful and emotional thing with this when he's able to balance the music so that it has this feeling of like vague melancholy. Like when I listen to those songs, a song like Less Than Zero and a song like I Feel It Coming, both of which would be top 10 Weeknd songs for me. Like I imagine like, and those YouTube videos where it's like an empty mall and a song is just kind of playing through the sound system, and it's like mixed so that it sounds like it's in this kind of acoustically large space.
Yes.
Like that to me is the setting that I imagine, or like an ice skating rink in the nighttime, and you're just like sitting there, and I don't know, there's just something of that kind of liminal space feeling to these songs, and that's one of my favorite things that the Weeknd does now.
Those sublime fucking hooks, the fucking vocal melody.
Yeah,
he's fucking I can't get it out of my head. That has been in my brain like a fucking hook. Like a literal fish hook in my head, and I don't want it out.
There's a genuine kind of tenderness in it too that feels more like just genuine than it ever has before. And I would say
the first half of After Hours has a lot of songs like that.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Like Hardest to Love, I think of as well.
Oh God, I love that song.
Yeah. Morgan, I'm curious to hear from you at this point. What was because you have a bit more of a, I guess, less involved or / slightly contentious relationship with the Weeknd. So what was your sort of expectations? Like, how did you feel about After Hours? And then how do you feel this record holds up?
I loved After Hours. I think I would, if we were doing the podcast when it came out, I would probably give it like an 8.5. I think it's really interesting in terms of its structure and the way it sort of conveys its themes. It almost feels like a concept album in a way that this literal concept album doesn't. But the big I didn't really have any particular expectations for this. I remember hearing Take My Breath and be like, I guess I like disco now. It's funny, it came out so long ago now, or at least it feels like it came out so long ago now, that I heard it come up on the album and I was just like, have I heard this song before?
It's still kind of ironically eclipsed by Blinding Lights, which is still a very successful, also a perfect song.
Yeah,
it has not lost any of its value for me, honestly.
No, me neither. Yeah, amazing song.
This album definitely has much more of a mixtape type of feel. For me, it kind of feels a bit more structured, like one of the trilogy mixtapes, in comparison to something like After Hours, just with the more, Michael Jackson, early 80s disco influences on it. And I really enjoyed this. Its appeal is somewhat limited by the fact that it just kind of feels cobbled together in a sense, in a way that even the mixtapes do not feel. And there are parts of it, particularly in the second half for me, that are real sort of mixed bag. But like I've been listening to songs off of this. Some of them are just straight up addictive. Like the way that the vocal effect on Gasoline and his delivery of it syncs up with the beat, and then when the vocal effect comes off in the chorus is like crack. My favorite song on here, right now at least, is "Sacrifice."
Great song.
Which is just pure thriller Michael Jackson type of shit.
Yes.
Oh, God,
so, like that Nile Rodgers ass guitar in it. It
Yes.
just, I want to snort it. And just again, the vocal hooks on that one are outstanding. The negatives have pretty much been mentioned by everyone at this point, and I am pretty completely in line with those. But overall, this is definitely a very enjoyable experience.
I would actually compare this album, now that I think about it, is that this strikes me as most similar to David Bowie's Young Americans. Very similar sonically, very similar structurally, even very similar kind of sound even being gone for. Sacrifice in particular, like it's that era of music of like that meets that sort of tightness that like Michael Jackson sort of had in his heyday. I think that's kind of why I'm a little bit more not forgiving of the flaws, but it's just like all the flaws here are like, yeah, there's a couple, and you know, there are more than a couple, and I think I've listed them, but the sheer fact of the matter is that the songs themselves are the front and center thing. Everything else is just so easy to push aside. All right, Ryley, you little shit.
Oh boy.
Look,
no,
we all have these moments. Like, you do this podcast long enough, like, I'm grateful to have not had many of them, because I tend to be the person who is like the most sort of forgiving and sort of empathetic with artists and what they're trying to do. And like, I really wanted to like this. I did, because I love After Hours. I co-sign everything that has been said about that record. When I realized I wasn't vibing with this new record at all, I went back to After Hours to make sure that something about The Weeknd hadn't just permanently soured for me. And no, I still love that album. Absolutely, unequivocally. I love the way that album is set up. That it's already been mentioned, the way that album has quite a conceptual sort of nature baked into the track progression, the two halves of that album, the emotional kind of journey that you're pulled on through that album. And I appreciate The Weeknd for continuing to think of his albums conceptually here. And I'm with Jake at the end of the day, that what matters is not, you know, the concept isn't the thing that matters as much as just the songs themselves. And believe me when I say the concept is much stronger than the songs themselves, and the concept is not all that well thought out, as has already been stated. But look, I've already kind of emphasized, when you have all said things I agree with, that I agree that there are some standout songs here, and I won't have hot takes about, well, most of them I agree with. Take My Breath. I remember hearing that last year, loved it then, still love it now. It's really great. I love the way that The Weeknd has leaned further into the kind of disco elements of his sound that kind of came out of his initial collaborations with Daft Punk. I will say, though, that it feels at many points on this record, when he does lean into that he's kind of spinning his wheels creatively, in a certain sense, that the best moments on this record, I like them because they remind me of previous Weeknd songs that I like, and they do a certain thing that those songs do, and it's like, oh, cool, another helping of what I liked about those previous Weeknd songs. Not as good as those previous Weeknd songs, but, you know, pretty strong, and tapping into that thing that I enjoyed. And those are the absolute peaks of this record, where I'm reminded of Weeknd songs that I like more, you know, with the exception of Less Than Zero, which is pretty great. Like, it's pretty just unequivocally great. But yeah, that's my thing, is that there's about an EP's worth of songs here that I'm like, this is really solid stuff. And if these songs had been put out as an EP around this time, as a sort of like, you know, stopgap between After Hours and whatever's next, I would be perfectly fine with that, and I would be happy to embrace that. And it would be a really strong EP, certainly stronger than the last EP he did, which no one remembers.
Not good.
The thing is, though, there's that EP here, and then there is about, let me see, like, I don't know, 40 minutes of the most dull music that The Weeknd has released in years. The most undercooked, the most, like, at points just insipid, in my opinion. Like, and look, I'm gonna be really upfront about how I feel, because I feel like I would be disrespecting you guys if I kind of held back and said, well, no, I'm just going to be upfront. I find
you mean what I do every time this happens to me?
I've done it before, Jake, as well. It's what people like you and me gravitate towards doing because we want to be liked. But at the end of the day,
ow.
Well, it's true. It's true of both of us.
It was because it was true that it hurt.
Well, here we are. But look, every time I listen to this record, I enjoy it less, and I have to be honest about that. The comparison I thought of, and this is going to be really the thing that I think potentially gets me kicked off of the podcast for saying this, is that to me, this is like The Weeknd's Star-Crossed. To me, that's what this is.
Fuck off. No, it is not.
It is.
What?
It is.
Structurally, I see what you mean.
I'm not even
in every other sense. Okay?
It's a better record than Star-Crossed. It has songs that are better, definitely, than the best songs on Star-Crossed. But to me, like, in terms of the kind of record it is and the kind of thing it's doing at this stage in his career, I have the same overall emotional reaction, which is, that's it. You're doing like the most sort of basic and kind of like minimal and just sort of uninspired like versions of like what. So you're taking a previous record that was a triumph for you, Golden Hour in the case of Casey, and After Hours in the case of The Weeknd. You're essentially tweaking that formula. You're essentially doing that sort of thing again, but turning up the kind of electronic elements. But the songs that you're writing are the most kind of like plodding and just unmemorable. And at times, like, just for me anyway, just genuinely irritating in terms of persona. And I feel bad saying that, because I get that this record overall is The Weeknd opening up this more tender side of himself. And I appreciate that he's doing that. And it's not a reflection of how I feel about him personally, but the persona he often projects here is, it's like a sanitized version of the most irritating things that he's done in the past, where he's like begging in this really kind of pathetic way for this girl to come and be with him, and like, you miss this dick, and like, you fucking, I miss you and I need you, and I've heard you got married and I'm fucked up. And it's like, you can do songs that are compelling in that guise if you kind of really lean into the emotionality of it, but he sounds like he's sleepwalking through them. And the instrumentals themselves are just, they feel so underdeveloped. They sound, reasonably immaculate. Like, it doesn't have the kind of production woes that Star-Crossed had. There's definitely, like, on the surface, a gloss to this record.
Reasonably immaculate.
Like, they sound very good. There's no moments. Well, there is the song Gasoline, which is probably, I guess, my most contentious opinion, in that I find it just, I don't enjoy listening to it. I find a lot of things about it to be very chaotic and messy and just ill-conceived. But it's fine, because after that you get into a stretch of 3 songs.
Chad, yes.
That is exactly what I've been thinking this whole fucking time. It's just like, yeah.
I'm sorry for disliking the chaotic song that has him leaning away from his best vocal talents and just really combining these dancey elements that don't work very well together. Don't at least make for a well-constructed song, in my opinion. That said, How Do I Make You Love Me, Take My Breath, Sacrifice, Let's Pretend, the Quincy interlude, which is fucking stupid, doesn't exist, and Out of Time. Really strong section of songs. I would say the only one of those that really holds up with his best is Take My Breath, but the others are enjoyable enough. Like, they do have a thing where they kind of just sort of happen a little bit. Like they don't swell or build in as exciting of ways as Take My Breath does, those other songs, but they are highlights on this record. And then you get to Here We Go Again. Best Friends, Is There Someone Else? Is There Someone Else actually was the moment on the record where I thought of the Casey Musgraves comp in particular, because there are moments on this record like that one, and like Best Friends, which is like where he's like, you know, she wanted to fuck me, but she doesn't want to be my friend anymore, or whatever he's fucking singing about. And I'm just like, I have no emotional connection to you, dude, like I have been able to have on other records. Like, to me, you sound whiny, and he has sounded whiny in the past. It's why I hate Kissland so much, because to me, that record is an hour of this dude fucking whining about how having meaningless sex and being basically borderline abusive in his relationships, whether fictional or not. We're supposed to get some kind of empathy or like connection out of that, and it's just, I feel completely nothing. And this record doesn't have the same sense of like alienation from me to that degree, but there are long stretches of this record, particularly Here We Go Again through to I Heard You're Married, which is about half of the album, where I'm checking out completely. I don't connect with him in any way, and it really hurts that the songs are just not there either. He is in the single one note mode for this entire stretch of the record, and he's not bringing the songs to back it up. I mean, the best song in the stretch is maybe Don't Break My Heart, which at least kind of has a bit of a sort of like soulful sentiment that feels kind of classical that he's leaning into. But again, it's like, it feels more pastiche than like a genuine moment of connection for me with The Weeknd. And I find I heard You're Married, which is definitely my least favorite non-interlude track on this album, to just be so fucking eye-rolling and just boring. And then when you have Lil Wayne coming in on it, and what goes through your head to think, who's a featured artist to have on this particular song, where he's channeling like these kind of like soul singer, like R&B vibes and the subject matter, like Marvin Gaye sort of shit, not like in sound, but in like personality. When I think of like,
I think what you're looking for here is Lionel Richie.
Yeah, Lionel Richie, actually, that's an even better comp. I was thinking like Here My Dear era Marvin Gaye, but Lionel Richie is maybe even better. And you put Lil Wayne on it, and I'm just like, what?
I do love the song Here We Go Again, because it is a stupid pastiche corn fest. But there is also the part of me that's like, why is Tyler the Creator on this Michael Bolton song?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I do it either.
Okay. I have to admit here, the thing is that like, this album never once really gets on me with like, I guess it's just because it's different with After Hours, because that is an album that you can sort of feel the emotionality of, but it's like, I don't really think this album tries to do that, because like everything here just feels so wink nod theatrical that I was never trying to engage with it in that aspect. It was just like, nah, I just kind of want to like dance and shit. And that's what this is for. It's like, this is like this irreverentness and this like pastichiness. I'm not trying to like lump a bunch of negatives on it, make it sound like, and that's why it's good. I'm just saying that like,
absolutely.
Why there is no point in trying to engage with this in the way that one would engage with After Hours, because there's just nothing there. It's completely different.
Sure, and I absolutely am not taking away from any of the things that you like about it. Certainly not. I can absolutely. I want to be able to enjoy the record on that issue. And again, it's not necessarily a matter of conceptual failure, although I do think the concept is flimsy, and every moment he tries to remind us about it, he does so using the most eye-rolling, juvenile fucking poetry imaginable. Like, Jesus Christ, like, and okay, another aspect of the record I dislike, and I want to bring in here some of the things that August has passed on, because August can't be with us, but he has passed on his thoughts, and he's definitely closer to me.
He can't be with us because he's passed on.
I thought August just passed on, and this review of Dawn FM is the last thing he left us.
In
no,
memoriam.
he specifically left comments on the interludes here, and essentially his points, which I agree with, boil down to they don't justify their existence. They disrupt the flow of the album as opposed to complementing it. They often take you out of it. Like, again, that stretch of the record that I quite enjoy early on is broken up by this tale of Quincy, which, again, I get, and I think you could quite eloquently tie to, as Jake did, you know, how Quincy's story and his kind of upbringing relates to how the Weeknd has come to reckon with his own relationships with women and stuff. I do think it's somewhat soured by the fact that the rest of this album is him kind of moaning about the fact that some woman doesn't want to fuck him or doesn't like want to have the kind of relationship that he wants to have. I think that there's some dissonance there that I'm sure.
I mean, it's an explanation. It's not dissonance. It's just saying like, this is why I am the way I am. It's not like reckoning with it. It's an excuse to enjoy hedonism. It's not a justification.
Sure. And look, and I think there's definitely a case to be made there. And I'm not saying that my read of it is definitive. Like my perception of slight, you know, I don't want to say hypocrisy because that's a little bit too loaded of a word, but just slight inconsistencies in concept and then songwriting. That's just how I read it. I think there could be a very eloquent defense given, and I would love to hear it genuinely. But I do think that some of the asinine poetry that we're subjected to in songs like Every Angel is Terrifying and like Phantom Regret it feels kind of preachy and kind of really sort of like, this is the point where I really occurs to me, like, this is his pandemic album as well. Like he has, there are lines here like, now that all future plans have been postponed and it's time to look back on the things you thought you owned. And obviously it's not like, you know, directly about that. And obviously there's parallels and applications to different sorts of themes and like life struggles and sorts of things that the Weeknd's talking about here as well. A lot of it feels very kind of like just weepy and just very cliche, and it's not helped by the fact that I actually find Jim Carrey's voice and presence kind of irritating, or not irritating, but it kind of detracts more than it adds, because I'm hearing this dude whose voice I associate so strongly with just like being a total fucking goof, trying to be like genuinely heartfelt and sad. And it's not, I mean, I'm not saying that Jim Carrey can't do that or shouldn't try to have range, but he just doesn't quite land for me. And I wish it did, because again, like there's so much of this that obviously OPN is influenced with the radio concept and the little radio blips and jingles and stuff that are so OPN sounding. And it's like, here's actually a good way of saying it, is that when I listen to this record, it makes me, first of all, it makes me want to go and listen to After Hours instead, but it also makes me want to go and listen to Magic 106 Point Never, which I feel like is a record that in its surface has a similar sort of like conceit in terms of like the structure and concept and the way that this is supposed to be experienced as like a continuous late night radio program. That I think that record does much more beautifully than this record does. And of course, that record even features The Weeknd as well. So yeah, look, I think I've spoken for long enough and probably been annoying enough to listen to when you love this record.
Not annoying.
Frustrating, maybe.
Just putting your opinion.
But yeah, I can't help but feel that at the end of the day, it feels like this, one, it feels a little bit rushed in the sense that it feels like these songs are undercooked and the concept is undercooked, and the really strong moments here are kind of dulled a little bit by the baggage that surrounds them as well. From the future, I don't think I'll come back to this record very much. I've listened to it 4 times this week. I will happily take my Take Your Breaths and my Less Than Zeros and move forward. The Weeknd's always been hit or miss for me, and I hope to see him really bounce back with something strong and substantive, because at the end of the day, really, all this feels like is After Hours B-sides coated in a half-baked shell to try and give it some wider meaning and significance that it doesn't earn.
Two things before we move on. A, I do share this criticism. That said, of the overall conceptual thing, I agree. Magic 106 Tricks Point Never is an album that does what this is trying to do better. That said, and I say this as someone who agrees, but is also wants to come at this with a bit of perspective, in the sense that when we talk about an album having a concept, and and it's just like not going into the concept enough or whatever, it's like, I get that complaint, but at the same time, I also think, what did the concept really add to Magic 106 Tricks Point Never for me? And the answer is not much, because yeah, it adds a little bit of extra cohesion, but I like that album for reasons that are like that's at the bottom of the list. Frankly, it's a garnish. It's a bit of frosting on the top of the cake. Frankly, if the songs are still there and the concept is removed, I think that album is basically the same. And the only difference here is that if I think the conceptual elements are taken out of here, which again are only a mite fraction of the overall runtime, it's a better album, in fact.
Maybe instead of the word concept, a better word would be identity. For me,
that's fair.
An album should have an identity. Like, to me, Magic 106 Point Never has an identity. It has a thing that distinguishes it from the other records. And if a record doesn't have that, it could still be good. Like, you could still be surface level enjoyment. But for me, a record can't be great if it doesn't have an identity. And not only does this not have an identity to me, again, I just feel that the songs aren't all there all the time. And that's just where I come at it from. I'm not saying it's bad because it is a failed concept. I think that's an aspect of the record that holds it back. If I'm to take it seriously, if I'm to give The Weeknd the respect of like engaging with what he's trying to do rather than ignoring it. But at the end of the day, I just think that it's just not there. And that's me. I don't often get to be this dude. So
as somebody on the other end of the spectrum, the thing is too, is that like, when I'm talking about individual song ratings here and stuff like this is a consistently very enjoyable album. But the only thing that there's two songs here that I think are as good as the songs on After Hours. So undeniably, I think that it suffers from the fact that like the vast majority of it is in fact very, very good, but is definitely going to live in the previous record's shadow at the end of the day.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, though, real quick, I do agree with your criticisms that the second leg of this record definitely feels undercooked. The only song I said outright sucks is Best Friends. It felt more like a parody of a Weeknd song than anything.
That's exactly why I love that song. It's so funny. I love it.
You know what? That's fair. That's totally fair. I definitely can see like especially like on Don't Break My Heart and like Here We Go Again, I think is probably the best. It feels
like a joke is being played on the character Abel's playing. It feels like a joke at his expense, and I laugh at him. And the instrumental's good, so I don't fucking I
mean, Here We Go Again to me, like that is the joke to me, like because it's like, oh, here we go again, because it's like he's been.
That's the title. Here we go again.
3 different high-profile relationships, and like they all went to crap, and it's like, oh, because like the rumor of this album is that it's about Angelina Jolie.
The rumor come out.
Yes. And that's something
Does The Weeknd is gay?
Does The Weeknd is gay?
That would be something if that were to come out. All of
that'd be amazing. Yeah. Fucking teams up with Sufjan Stevens for a record.
And writes a song about the film After Hours.
I'm just imagining a scenario where he's like on the next Frank Ocean album and he like drops a verse about how he like,
Kiss a white boy since 2004.
Just the tipped and his buddy's ass just once.
Call it a weekend.
Oh, favorite tracks and ratings. Jake, why don't you lead us off?
My favorite tracks, I'm going to go with Less Than Zero for sure. Gasoline has very much grown on me, and Sacrifice. Least favorite, Every Angel is terrifying. No matter what perspective you look at this album with or how forgiving you are of it, you can come to the definitive conclusion that it does not need to be here. And I give the album an 8.
All right. My three favorite tracks are going to be Less Than Zero, Take My Breath, and Sacrifice. My least favorite track is going to be I Heard You're Married. And yeah, I'm going to give it a 4.5.
My favorite tracks on here are Take My Breath, Out of Time, and Less Than Zero. And I would give this a 7.5. And my least favorite track is, if it's an actual song, Best Friends. If it's a moment on the album, Phantom Regret by Jim.
August has given the album a 5. And now it is Morgan's turn.
My three favorites are Gasoline, Less Than Zero, Out of Time. My least favorite is Every Angel is Terrifying. And I will give this a 7.5.
All right, so that is an average of 6.5. Moving on to our second review of the day, and we are zipping back to December for I'm pretty sure will be our last 2021 review. And it's an album that came late in the year that I wasn't even aware of until this year.
Right, Taylor Swift. Back to December. I'll see myself out.
Tricot is a Japanese math rock, J-rock, indie rock, power pop, pop rock, whatever the fuck you want to call them. They have done it all. They are legends. They have been around for just over a decade now, during which time they have released 5 records that vary in their heft in terms of the math rock genre. I am only intimately familiar with their debut, which is one of my favorite first listens of the year so far. I discovered it about a week and a half ago. Absolutely blew my mind. Absolute top tier, high echelon math rock record. Super intense, super awesome, super fiery. And so when I heard that they had a new record that came out in December of last year, their 6th album, JODEKI, I thought, shit, I want to check this out. I think a couple of members of the podcast, including maybe Saoirse and it might have even been Connor when he was on once, mentioned this band. And so I thought, shit, okay, it's an all-girl math rock band. There's no way this shit isn't going to whip. And so I checked out JODEKI, and I was surprised and delighted to find out that they had shifted somewhat from the pure, intense, aggressive math rock sound of into something that is, again, much more approaching J-rock, much more appropriating art rock, indie rock aesthetics and sounds, much more diverse and colorful and tuneful than what I had expected. And this was an album that I listened to once, and I thought this will absolutely be interesting and fascinating enough for us to review this week. But the more time I've spent with it this week, the more kind of enamored and beguiled and just kind of in love I've fallen with it. It is such a charming album, and I think it has such a unique and fun appeal that a lot of sort of indie rock and sort of pop records of this nature don't have. And the reason that it has this is because it is an indie rock or J-rock album made by a math rock band. So you have this enormous heft in the rhythm section. You have these arrangements that are super dynamic, that are super airtight, that are super aggressive. This is an album that never once flags. There's maybe 1 or 2 songs that could be construed as ballads here, but they're like also so fiery and energetic and so full of like guitar bliss that they don't really feel like they are lulls in the track listing. To me, this is just like, I said this to Jake before we started recording the podcast today, like when I put this album on, like I just get this immense feeling of like, this is my shit. Like this just is absolutely everything that I want from a record like this. And so I thought, shit, I'll chuck it on the list and I'll see what everyone else thinks of it, because at the end of the day, I can't imagine this being a total flatline for anyone. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it there. And I want to hear from you guys what your response was to this record, what you think of it, what you think of the different sort of like flavors and genre stuff that it does, and yeah, what your general impressions are.
I like the album. It's very good. I do have more in-depth thoughts, thankfully. I think
I don't.
I think, well, that's the thing, is that, like, broadly speaking, all of these songs kind of just kick ass for the same multiple reasons. I just think that this is like the album cover for this record is perfect because it's colorful and vibrant, and it's got a good boy on it, and he's doing excellent, and I'm glad, I'm happy for him. That said, I think the cool thing about this album is really just how many different sounds it dabbles in. This band has sort of gone from like the more like aggressive kind of math rock shit, which I'm actually kind of curious to hear now that I've heard this, because I bet they do a kick-ass job of it. But the sort of variety here of leaning into more accessible rock and sort of pop sounds really benefit this, and that like there's just every song here is so dynamic. The best example of which is probably my favorite song on here, which is the fourth song, Tissue, which this song just goes back and forth from being bouncy, slow, thank you, dreamy, but also really aggressive and hard and punky on occasion. And it's just a blast. The lead singer is fucking amazing. Exactly what I want for in the vocalist of any rock record is that she's both like just traditionally very vocally impressive, sounds pretty, very, you know, sings the hooks on songs like the opener Talk Soon, which is like, it's a little bit less like sung here, but it's no less like catchy and fun and bouncy. But then when you have to deliver the slightly more aggressive tonality of something on a song like Inai, which is, you know, fucking rager, or a song like Walking, which is fucking, yeah! There's a lot of songs on here that like legitimately just they don't ever stay in one mode. This is a very restless album, and I guess mileage may vary on that, but I'm very much okay with the fact that it's constantly bouncing back and forth between not even like one or two sounds, but like 4 or 5. And the versatility on each and every one of these is outstanding. It leads to having less contained thoughts on particular tracks, just because this album is so like weirdly sprawling, sonically anyway. But it's just a blast from start to finish. I think that maybe if there's any quote unquote insubstantial moments on it, it probably comes in form of Dogs and Ducks, which is it's pleasant. I don't really have much feeling towards it specifically, but it's, you know, it's fine. And while a good song, I wouldn't say, I'd say that the final track on here, while good, definitely doesn't measure up to the rest of the really fun material on here. And there are moments too where a lot of the guitar tones are really atmospheric and thick and kind of like shoegazy in the front half, and that kind of stuff. Like the song will just suddenly do that because it decides to, and it's great. These girls clearly have a great grasp on their sound, and you know, like, it sounds kind of reductive to say this, but it's just like, if you frequently enjoy anime intros and ending theme songs, here's an album that sounds like it is one of the best ones you've ever heard, one after the other. Very, very much enjoyed this very colorful, sprightly record. I'd say that like the mathiness is felt a little bit more in the structure of the songs than in the sound, but I didn't really find myself minding that all too much. There were a couple kind of winding or more, you know, weird timed signature playing with, but nothing, you know, no like dismemberment plan style shit or anything, but not necessary when you have something that's as upbeat and fun as this is generally. So
I'd say there are at least a couple of moments that I think I would compare to a band like Dismemberment Plan. But
oh, sure.
I agree. Like what I love about this band is that they're kind of like, they're obviously a math rock band. You can sense that roots just by listening to the music, but like they infuse that sort of genre template with stuff that you wouldn't typically associate with that genre template, with this bright sort of like candy coated pop sensibility. Like to me, it fits in really well with like current trend and alternative pop music and like hyper pop and that kind of thing. Like aesthetically, it's very different, but it fits in terms of like personality and in terms of like colorfulness. It seems really, really like it feels really, really like culturally like happening in a really like in fashion and like really, really like suited to the time that we're in at the moment.
Caro Bonito really likes this band, I bet.
Well, shit. I mean, yeah, that's another great comp as well. And I think that I love Caro Bonito. Well, I like them quite a bit, but I think like the difference between me and like most kind of like indie people, I guess, is that this is more my kind of band than that band. And worth mentioning as well, like this is in the past 24 months, this is the third album this band have put out in that time span. And so their level of kind of productivity and quality has been really, really, really quite profound. And I'm going to listen to all of those records just because I'm so in love with this. But Jacob, when I told you we were going to be reviewing this in DM, you said I got immediately that you were familiar with this band. So why don't you kind of tell us about like your history with this band, in as much as you have one, and what your experience with this album has been.
So, time for a video essay called "How Tricot Made Me Love Math Rock." So, most math rock is not really my cup of tea. Maybe I started with the wrong band. Because like a friend of mine is really into Dance Gavin Dance, and like I like they showed me a couple of their songs, and I was just like,
I wouldn't.
Really my bag. It's like
Nah.
The thing is that like it sounds to me like post-hardcore without the pure raw emotion, and like prog rock without any of like the grand dynamics and theatricality. And so like I kind of assumed that math rock sounded like that. And then my good buddy Dylan, the greatest bisexual redhead this side of the Mississippi, we'll have these listening parties where we'll just like show each other shit whether we're really into. And he showed me a couple of songs by this band, and I was just like, holy shit, like who are these ladies? This is actually pretty amazing. And like I can't remember what album they came from. I think they may have just been singles, but they had this like really great fusion of math rock, but also of pop rock, and I really, really enjoyed that. And when you sent me Ryley, when you told me that we were going to be listening to this for the podcast, I was like, oh, now here's my chance to become more familiar with this band. So I also listened to their debut, and holy shit, I absolutely loved it. Like, absolute rager of a record. Like, from Pool alone, I was like, okay, this is a fucking banger. And I should also preface that I love American football. I love Slint, and I know those are also considered math rock bands, but they also have like a fusion of like Midwest emo, and on Slint's case, I consider them more post-hardcore, but they're also like, weirdly weird to define when it comes to genre.
Their genre is like, Slint.
Their genre is Slint. But I don't know, when I was listening to Tricot, I think what also really kind of got me was the vocal harmonies. I'm a sucker for a good vocal harmony, and they fucking deliver on almost like fucking every track. And then, so I listened to the JODEKI, and for the first track, I wasn't feeling it. The first minute or so I was, but as it continued, it really didn't do much for me, and it kind of like started falling into the same pitfalls that I personally don't like with the genre. But then Bakurdo, track 2, the build up to that lead guitar solo, fucking immaculate. And then the bass is thick, the drums are just perfectly done. You said it best, where it was like, yes, it sounds like a pop rock group with roots in math rock. So the percussion, the bass, it's all so interesting. Track 5, Kayoko, I listened to that shit 5 times before we started this because I could not get enough of it. Absolutely perfect when it comes to flavor and harmony. And I fucking love the playing and the drums. God, this album fucking slaps. Oh God. Like I don't really have much to say other than those things because, like, to me, every track basically could be the same thing. Aside from I think it was Jodeki. No, it was track 11, Hito Yasumi, with the funk guitars. That honestly, those didn't really do anything for me. But Tissue, like how, like I was like thinking to myself, like, how does a math rock band make tracks this danceable, this groovable?
Yeah, right.
I would like in Kyoko, like when they just kind of have that weird jazzy breakdown. I was like, and yet her voice sounded so like on still on top of the song. This really, to me, like, again, as much as I love American football and I love Slint, like this was like to me the band that makes me want to explore the genre of math rock even more. And I feel like that's probably the highest compliment I could give them.
Yeah, I mean, you're at the iceberg. I would consider those bands definitely like a part of the lineage, but also they're primarily other things more so than math rock. Whereas I think if you'd really enjoy bands like Battles and Don Caballero and
Battles, fuck yeah,
and Tone
Mirrored.
as well. Yeah, so I think we can get you fully into math rock. Don't worry about that. But Trico strike me as a really good band, a really good approachable band for appreciating the dynamic nature of math rock. It's more than just, hey, we can play like really, really fast time signatures and we can put we can change them up in the song and we can do
play
like
it in 17/5 and we
can
sing like we want to die.
We can do complex drum fills and we can do like little guitar parts that are like, like just really tiny and like anyway.
As Morgan once put it,
yeah, we can do that, but can we write songs? And the best math rock bands can do that. And I think Trico are really good at doing that. There's even like a punk energy to parts of this record as well. And songs
absolutely.
And songs like Inai and there's just like, this is the thing as well, like spending time with this record, as well as I've come to really appreciate that this thing has hooks. Like this thing has properly good hooks.
I can't properly say them, but they are definitely there.
Like I've been walking around my fucking flat going super summer. Night. Yeah, walking. Like Jesus.
Walking is the fucking second half of Walking is so much goddamn fun, man.
When they fucking switch up the tempo and it just gets super, super intense and super, super lumbering. Love that shit. Really big fan of Itsumo as well, the 9th track here. I think that one hasn't been mentioned yet, but that has like a really great groove to it that I really, really fucking dig. I love the way the record.
That's my favorite on here.
Shit, yeah, that one is so good. I love the way the record kind of like climaxes with Night Monster, which is this more kind of like expansive and sort of like epic and sweeping track that really gives the album a sense of kind of like build. Even the shorter and more insubstantive moments like Dogs and Ducks and Hitoya Sumi, which I'd agree are not quite as good as the other moments on the record, have some lovely sort of intricate guitar parts and sounds that I do really enjoy. I mean, first time I listened to this, I was like, it's a solid sort of like 7.5, really fun record. But no, the more time I spent with it, the more I'm just like, this is even better than that. This is really strong stuff. So I'm pleased that you guys all enjoyed it to varying degrees. And
it's an album of simple pleasures and people doing like really complicated and really proficient instrumental work to achieve a level of joy and raucousness that can't quite be achieved by something that's a little bit more fundamental than something like this usually might be, if I had to describe it in a word.
All right, favorite tracks and ratings then. Jacob, why don't you kick us off and we'll go in sort of backwards order.
Okay,
reverse Jacob order.
My favorite tracks on here are Tissue, Kyoka, and Super Summer. My least favorite would be Hito Yasumi. I apologize if I mispronounce anything. And I would give this an 8.5 out of 10.
Okay, my favorite tracks are Tissue for sure, Walking, Super Saiyan Manga. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God.
Fuck you. Fuck right off.
And I
also say my favorite tracks are Itsumo, Tissue, and Walking. Least favorite is Inai. I'll give this a 7 out of 10.
My 3 favorite songs are going to be Itsumo, Bakuro, and Tissue. Least favorite song, probably Dogs and Ducks, and I give it an 8.
That is an average of 7.9. So let us know at home what you think of either of the albums that we've discussed today. Did you like them? Did you hate them? Did you agree with us? Did you disagree? We're on the great Weeknd debate. Do you sit? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear from you. We love seeing your comments and we love responding to them. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you remember to give it a like as well. That really helps us out a lot too. If you enjoy what we do, please hit the subscribe button if you have not already. If you want to support us in a bigger way, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can become one of our supporters/family. Gives you priority reply to comments and also gets your name put in the intro to every single video we do on this channel. So please consider doing that if you like what we do. Make sure, of course, you go and follow Jacob as well at @pun_trash. As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Hallmark, when you care enough to send the very best.